12 months after dipping every root ball in a barrel of brown willow water, Caleb Stoltzfus walked through his young orchard on a cool spring morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and counted 200 trees. 200 apple and peach trees, every single one of them alive, green, and pushing out new leaf buds so thick that the branches looked like they were wearing fur coats. Across the gravel road, on the neighboring commercial orchard that stretched over 40 acres, the scene was the opposite of life. Row after row of dead fruit trees stood like gray skeletons against the morning sky. Brown, leafless, with bark peeling off in strips and roots rotted black underneath the soil. More than half of the neighbors' 1,200 trees had been killed by the same root fungus that had been tearing through every orchard in the county for the past 2 growing seasons. The commercial growers had spent over $40,000 on industrial fungicide sprays, soil drenches, and synthetic rooting hormones trying to save their orchards. They hired crop consultants. They sent soil samples to university labs. They injected chemicals directly into the ground around each trunk. And still, the fungus kept spreading underground like an invisible wildfire, eating root systems from the inside out and killing trees that had taken 5 years to grow. Caleb hadn't spent a single dollar on chemicals. He used nothing but a handful of fresh willow branches, a wooden barrel, and 24 hours of patience. And every one of his 200 trees was alive. If you've ever trusted your instincts when the experts told you that you were wrong, if you've ever chosen the quiet, simple path while everyone around you was spending fortunes chasing complicated solutions that didn't work, this story is about a man who listened to what a willow tree had been trying to tell farmers for thousands of years, and what happened when the rest of the valley finally stopped laughing long enough to listen too. But to understand how a bucket of brown water made from tree bark saved an entire orchard from a fungus that $40,000 in chemicals couldn't stop, you have to go back to the spring when Caleb first noticed the weeping willow by the creek doing something that no other tree on his property could do. Caleb Stoltzfus was 49 years old, a quiet, observant man who farmed 80 acres of mixed cropland and orchard in the rolling hills southeast of Lancaster. He had been farming since he was 12, learning everything from his father and grandfather before him. He kept dairy cows, grew field corn and hay, and maintained a small but productive orchard of heritage apple and peach varieties that his family had been growing for 3 generations. The trouble started in the late summer of the previous year, when a neighbor named Dale Brenner, who ran a large commercial apple operation, noticed that several of his mature Honeycrisp trees were dropping leaves in August, months before they should. When Dale dug around the base of one of the sick trees, the roots came up black, soft, and rotten, with a sour smell like vinegar mixed with wet cardboard. The county agricultural extension agent came out, took samples, and confirmed what Dale feared: Phytophthora root rot, a soil-borne fungus that lives in wet, poorly drained soil and attacks the root systems of fruit trees from below. Once it gets into an orchard, it spreads through groundwater and infected soil, moving from tree to tree underground, where no one can see it until the leaves start dying above. Dale immediately called a crop protection company. They recommended a full-scale chemical treatment. Fungicide soil drenches applied around every tree trunk 4 times per season, at a cost of roughly 35 POE RT. EEPOEI R AIPPLCION WITHTWELVIA BAJA UNDREDTREESL DALEWASLOOKINGITOVER 35 per tree per application. With 1,200 trees, Dale was looking at over 40 zeros a year just to try to slow the fungus down, and the chemical company was honest enough to admit that the treatment wouldn't cure infected trees. It would only protect the healthy ones that hadn't been hit yet. By late fall, the fungus had spread to 3 neighboring orchards. Growers across the county were panicking. Some ripped out infected trees and burned them. Others doubled down on chemical treatments. A few tried experimental biological agents recommended by the university. Nothing seemed to stop the underground spread. That same fall, Caleb was planning to expand his small family orchard. He had ordered 200 bare-root apple and peach saplings from a heritage nursery in Virginia. Young trees with exposed root systems, ready to be planted in early spring. These saplings represented a significant investment for a family farm. Nearly $3,000 in trees that would take 3 to 4 years before they produced their first real harvest. His older brother, Amos, who farmed the adjacent property, came over one evening to warn him. "Caleb, I wouldn't plant those trees this spring. The blight is moving this way. Dale lost over 200 trees already, and the Millers lost 80. If that fungus gets into your new saplings before the roots establish, you'll lose every dollar you spent." Caleb listened carefully. He respected his brother's concern, but he had been thinking about something he had noticed months earlier, and it had been turning over in his mind, like a stone in a creek bed. There was an old weeping willow tree growing on the bank of the creek that ran along the western edge of Caleb's property. It was a massive tree, probably 60 or 70 years old, with long, sweeping branches that dragged in the water. That willow had been standing in the wettest, most poorly drained soil on the entire farm. Exactly the kind of soil where the root fungus thrived and destroyed other trees. And yet the willow had never been sick. Not once. Not a single branch had ever rotted. Not a single root had ever turned black. While every other tree species planted near that wet creek bank eventually developed root problems, the willow stood there year after year, decade after decade, with roots so thick and healthy that they had actually cracked the stone foundation of an old spring house 20 feet away. Caleb had asked himself a simple question. Why does the willow never get sick in the same soil that kills everything else? He didn't have a laboratory. He didn't have a degree in plant science, but he had something that no university textbook could replace: 60 years of family farming knowledge and the habit of watching nature closely before acting. His grandfather had once told him something when Caleb was a boy, helping to plant fence posts along the creek. The old man had cut a fresh willow branch, stuck it straight into the wet ground, and said, "A willow doesn't need help to grow. You can cut a branch off, stick it in mud, and it'll have roots in a week. No other tree does that. The willow carries its own growing power inside the bark." That memory had stayed with Caleb for 40 years, and now, watching the fungus tear through every orchard in the valley, while the old willow stood untouched in the wettest soil on the farm, Caleb connected two things in his mind. The willow grows roots faster than any other tree, and the willow never gets root disease. What if those two things are connected? What if the same thing inside the bark that makes roots grow so fast is also the thing that protects them from getting sick? On a cold morning in early March, 3 weeks before planting day, Caleb walked down to the creek with a handsaw and a bushel basket. He cut about 30 fresh, green, finger-thick branches from the weeping willow, the new growth from the previous season, with the bark still smooth and green-brown. He carried them back to the barn, cut them into 6-inch pieces, and dropped them into a large wooden barrel filled with clean rainwater from the cistern. He covered the barrel with a burlap cloth and left it to soak for 24 hours. His wife, Hannah, saw the barrel in the barn the next morning. The water had turned a dark, amber-brown color, like strong tea. She lifted the cloth, smelled it, and wrinkled her nose slightly. "Caleb, what is this barrel of brown water for?" "It's willow tea," Caleb said, pulling on his work gloves. "I'm going to soak the roots of every sapling in it before I plant them." Hannah looked at the barrel, then looked at her husband. "Willow tea, for apple trees." "Yes. And this is going to protect them from the blight that killed Dale's trees." Caleb paused. "I believe it will." The willow never gets sick, Hannah. It grows in the worst soil on this farm, and nothing touches it. Whatever is inside that bark that makes willow roots so strong and so fast, I want to give that same advantage to our apple trees before they go into the ground. Hannah didn't argue. She had seen her husband's quiet instincts prove right too many times to question them now. She simply nodded and went back to the kitchen. The saplings arrived from Virginia on a Thursday morning in late March, packed in damp wood shavings inside long cardboard boxes. 200 bare root trees, each about 4 feet tall, with naked root systems spread out like pale fingers. Caleb set up a station in the barn. He placed the barrel of dark willow water on a low table, and one by one, he took each sapling, gently spread its roots, and submerged the entire root ball into the brown liquid for 15 minutes. He let the roots soak, absorbing the willow extract deep into every fiber. Then he set each treated sapling upright in a bucket of damp sand to wait for planting. His brother Amos stopped by that afternoon and found Caleb elbow-deep in brown water, dunking tree roots. Amos watched for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "Caleb, you're baptizing apple trees in willow juice." "I am." "And you think this is going to stop the blight?" "I think the willow knows something about staying alive in bad soil that we haven't figured out yet. I'm asking it to share." Amos looked at the barrel of dark liquid. "The commercial guys are spending $40,000 on fungicide, and you're using tree bark tea." "That's correct." Amos left without saying another word. But at the feed store the next day, he mentioned it to a few neighbors. By Saturday, word had spread through the farming community that the Amish farmer on Creek Road was washing his tree roots in willow soup before planting them. The reaction was predictable. At the local diner where the commercial growers gathered for coffee, Dale Brenner heard the story and laughed so hard he almost choked on his biscuit. "Willow water? That's an old wives' tale. That's the kind of nonsense my grandmother used to say when she stuck geranium cuttings in a jar on the windowsill. You can't fight Phytophthora with bark soup. That fungus laughs at stuff like that." Caleb heard about the laughter. He didn't respond. He planted his 200 treated saplings in carefully prepared holes on the south-facing slope of his best hillside field, spaced 12 feet apart in clean rows. He watered each one with a bucket of the remaining willow tea, diluted in well water. Then he mulched heavily with straw and waited. What Caleb didn't know in scientific terms, but understood perfectly through observation, was that the willow bark had released 2 extraordinarily powerful natural compounds into that brown water during the 24-hour soak. The first compound is what the willow uses to grow roots so explosively fast. When a willow branch breaks off in a storm and falls into wet mud, it can sprout thick white roots within 5 to 7 days. No other hardwood tree on earth can do that. The substance responsible is a natural growth starter that the bark produces in high concentration. It tells every cell in the cut end of the branch to stop being bark and start being root. It's the reason you can stick a willow twig in a glass of water on your kitchen counter and watch roots appear in a week. When Caleb soaked his apple tree roots in the willow water, that same growth starter soaked into the root tissue of every sapling. It told those young apple roots to grow faster, deeper, and more aggressively than they normally would. Instead of taking 4 to 6 weeks to establish in the new soil, Caleb's treated saplings began pushing new root growth within days of planting. The second compound is even more remarkable. The willow bark produces a natural substance that is, in the simplest possible terms, the plant world's version of aspirin. When a willow tree detects a threat, a fungus trying to enter the roots, a bacteria attacking the bark, an insect chewing the leaves, this substance triggers an alarm system inside the tree that activates its immune defenses. The tree's cells harden, the walls thicken. Chemical barriers go up around the infection site. The tree fights back from the inside. When Caleb's apple saplings absorbed this compound from the willow water, it pre-activated their immune systems before they even went into the ground. It was like giving a young soldier body armor before sending him into battle. The saplings went into the soil already on high alert, with their internal defense systems switched on and ready. By June, the difference was becoming visible even from the road. Caleb's 200 saplings were pushing out vigorous new leaf growth. The leaves were dark green, thick and healthy. Several of the more vigorous peach trees had already put out their first small blossoms, which was unusually fast for first-year transplants. Across the valley, the blight continued its underground march. Dale Brenner lost another 150 trees, despite spending an additional $15,000 on a second round of chemical soil drenches. The Millers, who had tried an experimental biological treatment recommended by Penn State, lost 60 more. By midsummer, the mood among the commercial growers was grim. Some were already talking about bulldozing entire blocks and replanting from scratch, a process that would cost years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. In August, Amos came over to Caleb's farm to help repair a fence line. On the way back to the barn, they walked through Caleb's young orchard. Amos stopped in the middle of a row of apple trees and looked around slowly. Every tree was alive, every single one. The leaves were lush and full. There were no signs of wilt, no yellowing, no leaf drop. He knelt down and scraped away the mulch at the base of one tree. The soil was dark and rich, and when he pulled gently on the trunk, it didn't budge. The roots had already anchored deep. Amos stood up and brushed the dirt off his knees. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, without looking at his brother, "Not a single one died." "Not a single one," Caleb confirmed. "And Dale lost how many this year?" "Over 400, last I heard." Amos stared at the healthy green rows stretching up the hillside. "Caleb, was it the willow water?" "I believe it was. The willow gave these roots a head start. They grew deep and fast before the fungus could reach them. And I think the willow also woke something up inside these trees, some kind of strength that helped them fight the sickness off on their own." Amos picked a leaf off the nearest apple tree and turned it over in his hands. It was perfect. Not a spot, not a blemish. He put it in his shirt pocket without saying anything. The following week, Amos showed up at Caleb's barn with 2 empty barrels and a handsaw. "Show me which branches to cut," he said. By October, when the leaves turned gold and the first apples began to color on Caleb's second-year trees, the story had traveled far beyond the local community. Dale Brenner himself drove up Caleb's lane one afternoon in his pickup truck. He didn't get out right away. He sat in the cab for a minute, looking out through the windshield at the rows of healthy trees on the hillside. Then he opened the door and walked over to where Caleb was stacking firewood. "Caleb, I owe you an apology. I laughed at you at the diner when I heard about the willow water. I said it was an old wives' tale." Caleb set down a log and wiped his hands. "No apology needed, Dale. You were worried about your trees. We all were. I lost over 400 trees this year, $40,000 in chemicals, and I still lost them. You didn't spend a penny, and you didn't lose one." Dale paused. Would you be willing to show me how you make the willow water? I'm replanting 300 trees this spring, and I don't want to lose them the same way." Caleb smiled. "Bring your barrels to the creek on Saturday morning. I'll show you which branches to cut and how long to soak them. It's simple, Dale. The willow does all the work. We just have to be humble enough to ask." Dale came on Saturday. He brought his barrels, and he brought 2 other growers who had heard what happened and wanted to learn. Caleb showed them the old weeping willow by the creek, explained which branches to cut, the fresh, green, new growth, no thicker than your finger, and how to chop them into short pieces and soak them in clean water for a full day and night. "The water will turn brown like tea," Caleb told them, standing by the creek in the early morning light. That brown color is the medicine. Soak your bare roots in it for 15 minutes before you put them in the ground. And water the hole with the leftover liquid after you plant. That's all there is to it. Dale looked at the brown water in his barrel. He looked at Caleb. He shook his head slowly and laughed. Not at Caleb this time, but at himself. $40,000 in chemicals, Dale said quietly. And the answer was hanging over the creek the whole time. It usually is, Caleb said. The answers are usually right in front of us. We just get so busy looking for complicated solutions that we walk right past the simple ones. Today, if you visit the orchards of Lancaster County in the spring, you might notice something in the barns and tool sheds of farms up and down the valley. Wooden barrels and plastic tubs filled with dark amber-brown water, with bundles of fresh willow branches soaking inside. What started as one quiet Amish farmer's observation has become a common practice among a growing number of growers who learned the hard way that the most expensive solution isn't always the best one. And down by the creek on Caleb's farm, the old weeping willow still stands, its long branches sweeping the water, its roots cracking stone, untouched by any disease, offering its ancient medicine to anyone patient enough to listen. If this story taught you something new today, or if you know a gardener, homesteader, or farmer who could use this simple willow bark wisdom, share this video with them. Sometimes the most powerful tools aren't the ones that come in expensive bottles. They're the ones that grow wild by the creek. Subscribe to the Country Porch, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment telling us if you've ever used willow water on your own plants. And remember, on the farm, the strongest roots don't come from a factory. They come from the quiet wisdom of a tree that's been solving its own problems since long before we arrived. God bless, and we'll see you on the next story.